Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to completely demystify vocal power. You know, if you've ever wondered how certain speakers or singers can project their voices for hours without getting tired or effortlessly hit those massive, powerful notes, well, I'm here to tell you the secret isn't magic, it's just pure biological machinery. We are going to look right under the hood at the engine room of the human voice. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our blueprint for today's explainer. We'll start off with the mechanics of breathing, then check out the anatomy of the diaphragm, define what vocal support actually means, map out the 3 support muscles, and wrap up by looking at airflow and the vocal folds. We're building this from the power source straight up to the final output. All right, section 1, the mechanics of breathing. Let's look at how your lungs actually operate day to day. Before we can even talk about projecting a powerful voice, we need to establish a baseline. Right now, as you're sitting there watching this, you're taking roughly 12 breaths every single minute. And for most of us, this whole process is entirely unconscious, right? Your body just automatically regulates its oxygen. But here's the core conflict of vocal projection. When you need to speak loudly, sing a long musical phrase, or perform on a stage, you literally have to actively intervene in that unconscious reflex. You are suddenly taking a biological system that desperately wants to run on autopilot, and you're forcing it into manual control. And that manual override starts with one highly specific muscle. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that muscle works. That red dome shape is your diaphragm, because your lungs are physically attached to it. When the diaphragm tenses up, it lowers. As it lowers, it pulls and stretches the lungs open. This creates a negative pressure, literally a partial vacuum inside your chest cavity, and air is instantly sucked in through your mouth and down your windpipe to fill it. It operates exactly like a mechanical piston pulling air inward. Then, when the muscle relaxes, it just springs back up into its dome shape and the air gets pushed right back out. Moving right along to section 2, anatomy of the diaphragm, let's look closer at this breathing muscle. We really need to understand the anatomy here, because seeing how this muscle connects to your skeletal system completely changes everything. The outer edge of the diaphragm is actually attached all along the bottom of your rib cage, stretching from your sternum in the front all the way to your lower lumbar spine in the back. Now, when it contracts and lowers like a piston, your external intercostal muscles, those are the little muscles between your ribs, contract too. Since the lower ribs in the front are made of flexible cartilage, they act exactly like a spring, expanding outward. In a normal, everyday breath, the diaphragm only moves down by a couple of centimeters. But during the heavy, deep breathing you need for strong vocalization, it can drop up to 10 to 12 centimeters. That is a massive difference. Which actually brings us to a really common anatomical myth we need to bust right now. You've probably heard a choir teacher or public speaking coach tell you to breathe into your belly. But anatomically speaking, absolutely no air ever enters your stomach. When that diaphragm drops those 10 to 12 centimeters, all those digestive organs sitting right below it in your abdominal cavity have to go somewhere. So they just get pushed downward and outward. Your stomach pushes out simply because your internal organs are being temporarily displaced, giving you this temporary food baby look. It is definitely not because it's filling up with air. Section 3, defining vocal support. This is where we get into the conscious exhale. So knowing how breath comes into the body is really only half the battle. Let's contrast these two states for a second. In your unconscious, everyday breathing, you inhale, the diaphragm relaxes, and the air just passively falls right back out of your mouth. Easy. But a conscious singing or speaking breath requires serious manual control. If you just let the air fall out passively, there is no way you can sustain a long sentence or belt a powerful note. Vocal support is strictly defined as the conscious act of holding your ribs in that expanded position to delay the natural automatic release of air. You are physically fighting the diaphragm's urge to just snap back up. So why go through all this effort? Well, it's to create and control what experts call subglottal pressure. Glottis just refers to your vocal cords, so subglottal pressure is simply the pressurized air built up right below those vocal folds. Controlling this pressure is the absolute ultimate goal of vocal support. Different pitches and different volumes require completely different amounts of air pressure and airflow. By actively resisting the collapse of your lungs, you can dial in exactly how much pressure is pushing up against your vocal cords. This ensures a beautifully stable, powerful airflow without totally overwhelming your system. All right, section 4, the 3 support muscles. Let's identify the specific biological levers we use. If support is all about physical resistance, what exactly in your body is doing the resisting? To maintain that rib expansion and carefully meter out your subglottal pressure, you have to engage a triad of muscle groups. It's absolutely not just your abs, which is a huge misconception. The true support muscle trio consists of your abdominal muscles, your upper back muscles, and your lumbar or lower back muscles. These three groups must work in perfect tandem. When they activate together, they essentially lock the rib cage open and act as the brakes on your diaphragm's release. In fact, you can feel this interaction in your own body right now. If you're sitting or standing, try this sequence with me. First, tilt your pelvis forward slightly so your lower back curves inward. Next, tense up your abdominal muscles. Finally, actively tuck your pelvis back under you to straighten your lower back, all while keeping those abs super tense. Do you feel that? You should immediately feel a physical lock-in around your entire torso. That dynamic tension you feel between the lumbar and the abdominals is literally your support engine turning on. Let's try another really quick interactive experiment just to feel this airflow control in action. I want you to try giving a very small, short cough. Take a brief pause right now and actually do it. As you do it, pay close attention to your abdominal area. You're going to notice that your stomach sharply moves inward. That inward darting motion is your support muscles automatically engaging to create a sudden burst of subglottal pressure to clear your throat. So, the crucial point is taking that automatic reflex and stretching it out. Try mimicking that exact same inward abdominal movement you just felt during the cough, but this time, do it slowly and continuously on a sustained z or z sound. We call these fricative sounds. By actively pressing the stomach inward slowly on these sounds, you are manually sustaining that subglottal pressure over time. Practicing this literally bridges the gap between a biological reflex and active, conscious vocal support. And that brings us to Section 5, airflow and vocal folds, where the air actually becomes sound. Now that we've generated and controlled all that pressurized air down in the engine room, it travels up your trachea and hits the larynx, which is your voice box. Inside here are some incredibly intricate internal muscles and cartilage. For instance, the thyroarytenoid muscle, which is actually the main muscle of the vocal fold itself, contracts to make the folds shorter and thicker for lower notes. Other muscles, like the cricothyroid, stretch the vocal folds to make them thinner for higher pitches. The pitch of your voice is literally just the number of times these little folds vibrate per second. Crazy, right? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the airflow interacts with those folds. They form a very narrow channel. When that highly controlled, pressurized air from your support system rushes through this tiny gap, the physics of fluid dynamics takes over. The rushing air actually creates another partial vacuum right between the folds, which pulls the mucosal membrane of the vocal cords sharply together. A totally great way to visualize this is what I like to call the speeding bus effect. Imagine you're standing on the sidewalk, super close to a massive bus driving past you at highway speeds. You know that terrifying feeling of being physically sucked toward the side of the bus? That's exactly what the fast-moving subglottal air is doing to your vocal folds. It pulls them closed rapidly and repeatedly. This means your sound is generated by pure aerodynamics, not by you squeezing your throat muscles together, which, by the way, is exactly what causes vocal strain. Which brings us to our ultimate takeaway for this explainer. Real vocal power is simply the perfect biological balance of support, muscle resistance, and controlled subglottal air pressure. When your abdominal, lumbar, and upper back muscles are correctly holding back the air, they provide exactly enough subglottal pressure to drive the vocal folds aerodynamically. This harmony totally prevents uncontrolled muscle constriction in the throat, saving you from vocal fatigue, hoarseness, and even permanent injury. The voice isn't some mystical, unexplainable thing. It's a biological instrument built of cartilage, muscle, and air pressure. Now that you understand the anatomy of your own engine room, from the piston of the diaphragm to the speeding bus effect of the vocal folds, the real question is, how will you pilot it differently today? The next time you have to speak in a big meeting or sing a challenging note, remember the levers you have at your disposal. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.